Andrew, thanks for joining us here today. We're really pleased to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about artificial agency.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. So tell us, what is artificial agency?
Yeah, Artificial Agency is a startup based here in Edmonton. We're in gaming and AI. And there's a lot of things happening in AI and research labs around the world. ChatGPT came out and started to expose people to the types of things happening in these labs. But we think there's a lot more that can happen to expose people to interesting and playful experiences with AI. It's not necessarily this scary thing that some people are talking about. It can also be a very playful thing, a very engaging thing, a very helpful thing. And that's how I like to think about it, and that's where we're going with it. Taking into games, enhancing play, and just trying to make the world a little bit more fun.
Yeah, that's definitely not something I think of when I think of ChatGPT as playful. So that's a cool thing to bring in. So how are you making games more playful?
Right now, there's a whole category of games, I think, that can't exist. And there are the standard mechanics for games. They've been around for 30 years. They rely on someone coming in and scripting systems, spending a huge amount of time developing that content, and if anything got missed, the game breaks. You have a bug, and at best, it's a meme. At worst, the person stops playing the game, and the developer loses a lot of revenue. A game that is playful, that is collaborative, that grows with you, can address some of those challenges. And so you might have an AI in a game that does something unexpected or novel. I'll give you an example. We'd forgotten to, or had removed, a particular bit of functionality for an agent to trade with a player. This isn't a thing that naturally happens in Minecraft. You throw something on the ground and then you can pick it up. But we hadn't enabled that functionality for this agent. And so we said, hey, I'd really like you to go and get me some wood from a chest. The agent had no way of giving that wood to the player. So instead, it built another chest and put that wood in the chest beside the player and then said, hey, I made a chest and put the wood in there for you because I can't give it to you.
Huh?
These sorts of experiences, really engage the player in new ways and feel good and feel engaging.
So the AI figured out a way to give the wood.
Yeah.
So that's the role of the AI in the game, is it's playing one of the players.
It's playing an assistant. One of the things that makes games fun isn't just that the game is well designed. It's that there's an intelligent thing playing the game. It's the dynamics of those things interacting. The intelligence is key for engagement and for entertainment. I think this is one of the secrets behind multiplayer games. They're more fun because there's more intelligence working towards goals and there's a lot more dynamics. One of the things about multiplayer games is everyone's their own protagonist. Everyone wants themselves to be the focus. We're seeing this in social media. Everyone sort of trying to vie for attention.
Main character energy.
Yeah. That's right. And in a video game, in a simulation where you have an intelligent character whose sole purpose is to keep the player engaged, keep them in flow, we can start to provide some of that additional intelligence and make the game more interesting, more engaging. The dynamics change when you have additional intelligence.
So are there certain characters that the AI can play?
We have a fairly general system. We support NPCs, and so you can just hook it up to a character you already have in your game. We support higher level systems, tutorials and coaches, quest givers, things that will moderate these sorts of things.
Okay, sorry, I need to back up. What's an NPC?
Yeah, great question. An NPC is a non-player character. This is something in the game, usually embodied, often humanoid, but not always, that you can interact with in the game. One of the current limitations with NPCs in the game are they're often talking signposts. They can't engage with the dynamics of the game that you can engage with as a player. So they can tell you about a thing, they can ask you to do a thing, but largely click a button, click a button, click a button. I'm going to go away, do a thing, come back. They haven't added dynamics to the world.
Yeah, they've got only limited options on what they can say and what they know about, really.
That's right.
I like that. What did you say? Living signpost or something?
Talking signpost.
Talking signpost, yeah. Right, okay.
And so we're really interested in, among other things, taking those NPCs and having them be able to have actions that affect the world, affect you, can cooperate with you to achieve a goal.
Okay, so giving them agency. I feel like you just led me there. Very good. And there's sort of like a hierarchy of these non-player characters. So there's the ones that are literally just the signpost. They just tell you the same thing over and over again. But then there's like ones that I think you said coach, quest master, or
coaches and things to do tutorialization. So one of the big problems in games is building content that keeps your player playing, not stuck, not burning out, not churning. You want the player to have an engagement where they're staying in flow. If they hit something that's frustrating, they don't understand a mechanic, it's been 3 weeks since they last played, and they don't remember how a particular thing works anymore, they can very easily bounce off the game. So keeping them going is really important. Current systems would require a huge amount of scripting to identify all of the different places where those sorts of situations arise and then manually build content to support that system. What we're talking about instead is having a system that can perceive the events in the game, what's going on, whether a player seems to be making progress towards their current goals, whether those are stated goals by the player or stated by quest systems. And then being able to take an intervention if something hasn't happened in a particular amount of time. And this can be something like a tutorial or a coach, just very simply spawning like you should go over here, or having a character walk up and say, follow me, and wander off. Very simple, natural ways to engage the player and get them back into flow rather than just sort of being stuck in the same place.
Right. And so previously there wasn't this intelligence that a game developer would have to think of all of the things that a character might have to say in all of the situations, write them all down, and there was no flexibility. So you're talking about building in AI so that it can handle these situations. And it almost sounds like an intelligent tutor.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, we want to be very flexible in the ways that we support game developers. So if they want it to act as an intelligent tutor, absolutely. If they want it to act as a companion that follows you in adventures. One of the experiences we've had is agents coming and asking us for things. And so in some of the game situations, we might have a role, Minecraft, for example. We've specified that someone is the mayor of the town and they need some goods, but everyone is assigned to a duty. And so they might come and ask you, hey, I need these things to produce some set of goods for the town. And this happens naturally. It's not something we had to script in. It just fell out of the dynamics.
Does your innovation make it easier for game developers, or is it differently hard?
Easier, and it's a new way of thinking. Typically, you build a finite state machine called a behavior tree. And this works by, there's a series of nodes. These are connected by edges. These nodes might be things like a if statement or run all of the children connected to this node. And they often run from top to bottom and then left to right inside of a node. And you can imagine that piping all of the information from any system in the game to all of the characters and saying, okay, in this finite state machine, if these conditions are true, then I want to do this thing, except I just launched a new piece of downloadable content, and now there's a way for this state machine to be in a state that it couldn't have previously been in, and now it's broken. Adapting the content, fixing those bugs, identifying all those bugs is a nightmare. And frequently what this means is the finite state machines are very simple because then they're understandable. The consequence of that is the agents are generally not very intelligent in the game. This is why we end up with talking signposts. What we're doing is bringing in foundation models that can ingest the data and make more reasonable decisions about what I should do next. At the end of the day, they're doing something similar to the behavior tree in terms of they are selecting actions from a set of available actions. But the process by which it's done is very different. Instead of trying to build this complex tree of decisions, you roughly describe the goals and outcomes you're looking for.
Oh, interesting. So you sort of like describe the tree to the LLM.
At a very high level, you might say things like, your role is to protect the town. You are a little bit lazy. You like to take naps in the afternoon. And then just let it loose. And maybe you want to tweak that character. Doing that now is just, adding a few more lines, describing more goals, more behaviors, rather than trying to go back to this tree and figure out, okay, what data do I need here and how does that affect these other systems?
Yeah. And I mean, I know a lot of those decision trees, like once you get into some really complex games, like it's a lot of like, if this, but then this, like there's a lot of different conditions that would change how things are reacting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those things are very difficult and fragile.
One of the things I find interesting about the games industry is it's the kind of place that you can have studios that have 2,000 people working on a game, or you can have somebody who is literally on their off time from their full-time job making a game. So this sounds like it would also make it easier for those smaller, like even 1 or 2 person teams, or maybe a couple dozen, to where they might not have the resources that a very large studio would have for that kind of thing.
I think that's true. People in studios right now are maybe focused on building out very large scope content, and that is a thing that we can support. We can remove the need to build a whole bunch of finite state machines, do these things. We're not in the generative content space, so we're not trying to build a larger world. We're not trying to build more textures, more animations. And so if they need those things, then there are other solutions for those. And so in some ways, yeah, depending on the design of the game, the smaller studio may still need some of those assets. But when it comes to behavior and acting in the world and making it feel like a rich place, we can absolutely help those studios scale.
And you did mention before about how there hasn't been, in your feeling, like a lot of innovation on the types of games. So, I mean, using this approach that you're using, what types of games could you envision that we just haven't been able to do yet?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people who would play games, but the current offering is just not palatable. It's not the sort of engagement they're looking for in their evenings. A lot of things where they are easy to describe, but hard to write down technically. Anything where there's ambiguity. Easy examples of this: social dynamic games, negotiation games, improv games. If I wanted to make a game that's just like, hey, let's do improv. We want it to be a little bit funny. There's going to be some props. Trying to build that using traditional methods would be very difficult or very repetitive. You can kind of choose. Having it open-ended like that right now is very hard.
From the perspective of the person playing the game, like what benefit would I see?
Players will frequently get frustrated, even their favorite games. There's some section of the game where they get frustrated, they get tired, or maybe there's a part of the game where they really don't really enjoy this part of the game and they would really love to get some help getting through it. This is different between different players. It is really based on a person's personality. It's individual. We know that people are looking for this sort of personal spotlight. They're looking to feel like they're important. And so we can reduce friction on the player so they don't get stuck in places. We can make them feel more engaged in the world. We can make them feel like the story revolves around them because they're investing their time. If you spend 80 hours on a game and you get into a situation that's frustrated or something that's going to block you, and being able to just continue through that, get some assistance easily, move through that, I think just adds a tremendous amount of value from the player perspective. In addition to feeling really like they're the main character in the world, and that there is additional intelligence there that's helping drive the world forward. It's not just a bunch of signposts in the world that are static and you're the only thing doing anything dynamic in the world.
I think I've definitely had that experience, especially I find kind of going into a game that I've played before. It's like an old favorite. And then the first 20 minutes feels like I'm like, well, I know how to do all of this, but I'm still getting kind of in tutorial land. But if you could sort of emphasize to more tailor to what the person is obviously engaging with more and not engaging with in the same amount, it's really interesting.
Or alternatively, if there's a part of the game that you haven't found yet, or content you haven't engaged with, being able to nudge the player towards, hey, you haven't discovered this whole set of mechanics over here. Yeah. You're missing it. It brings better return on development to the developer.
Beats having to look at a Wikipedia page after to find everything that you missed.
Yeah. And then from a developer perspective, one of the things that I heard repeatedly when I was in the games industry is you can't schedule fun. One of the things that makes a game fun is the amount of time and care that goes into crafting the experience. And then time really matters. The iteration really matters. Building these systems the traditional way takes an immense amount of time. Modifying them takes an immense amount of time. When you can sort of naturally say, this is the type of thing I'm looking for. Let's try these sorts of behaviors. Even if you decided not to ship that, you would save so much time just in the development experience, finding out where the fun parts are in that creative iteration loop. It moves so much faster that you can get a higher quality product in the hands of players.
Why personally were you interested in this area?
Back in university, I got the opportunity to work for Dr. Richard Sutton at his RLAI lab. Got really interested in intelligence, and then did a master's situated in a neuroscience lab and really started caring about how people interact with systems and what's going on there. And then ended up working in video games and looked at the state of the art in how players experience these games. And there are brilliant people working to make these games happen. But as I mentioned earlier, technology hasn't kept up with ambition. And so there are so many things where we can take the lessons from machine learning and the advancements in machine learning over the last 5-ish years and bring them to games in a really exciting, novel way. There are types of games I want to play that we just can't play. And so for me, it was like, there's a game I want to play. I know what it looks like. It's not possible today. I want to make it possible.
Do you have one like in mind? What is your dream game?
My dream game? Yeah, so it's kind of not really a game. It's more like an experience. It's kind of like being a student at a university with really smart people and just getting to learn all day. Before we started rolling, we were talking about some of our favorite things in the day. I mentioned one of my favorite things is learning things. The very first thing I hooked up with this technology was a research assistant. So that research assistant could search things, it could move in the world, and it could read PDFs and such. And we just started playing this little game. I'd put little objects in his world. He would tell me what sorts of things he wanted to do with those objects. And then I would ask him questions about, like, okay, well, how would you do that? How would you write code to give yourself that ability? And then it would go and search stuff and then tell me things I didn't know from papers I hadn't read. And
wow.
And so sort of taking that whole thing and being like, wow, this would be really fun. It's kind of like this university style experience, scaling it up, having more of these people, maybe having some goals and some objectives around that, but sort of focusing on getting people to take things that are applicable in the real world and bring them into a game scenario. Right now, we mentioned earlier, many game mechanics are 30 years old. They're not transferable to the real world. And learning is something that's transferable to the real world.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are you doing under the hood? So you have language models. The language models are actually generating the dialogue.
So we've done sort of the standard language foundation models. We use open source models just because the training costs on these things are enormous. Yeah. $100 million or something for a one shot on a language model. If it goes wrong, oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't.
Probably not startup land. No.
Definitely not startup land.
It's a bad day in the office when something goes wrong on your $100 million training.
Absolutely. So yeah, we use open source models. They're great. We can fine tune them pretty quickly.
What do you fine tune them on?
We started with handcrafted data. We would just write out types of scenarios. Then I mentioned this early experience. We set up this researcher. We realized early on that many of the same techniques we use for reinforcement learning are applicable here for generating trajectories of data and understanding which ones are good and which ones are bad. And so we started building out simulated environments to collect and build that data. Once we get into the hands of players, they are a very rich source of feedback if you can collect that data as well.
Oh, cool. So are you getting feedback from players?
We have some partners that we are working with. We haven't started collecting data from their players yet. Eager to do that soon.
Yeah, cool.
I'm curious when you talk about like the training, do you find, I mean, I don't know if you're at the point where you're kind of experimenting with different genres of games, but is the training very similar for different types of mechanics or genres, or is it very specific for each one?
Surprisingly not.
Yeah.
So the key thing that you want to train these things for is reasoning ability, for lack of a better term. The metaphors that let a player connect with the game, the fact that there are pieces of armor, chests, treasure keys, these are the same metaphors that exist in the language that the foundation model has been trained on. And so they very naturally translate. And then it's just about, okay, well, how do you use that to solve a class of problems? And with a bit of work, these language models can be surprisingly effective. They don't have to be perfect. We're not looking for optimal. We're looking for believable. And there's a big difference between optimal and believable.
Yeah, and I mean, like sometimes that non-optimum is what is that little spice of fun, right? It's different.
Absolutely. One of the lessons I think we've seen out of optimal play for many types of games is that playing against an optimal player isn't fun. No. It's actually a terrible and crushing experience.
Yeah, that's why I don't play multiplayer games all that much, to be honest with
you. Yeah, or like even chess games, right? They don't throw the best AI chess for the beginner player, because who would want to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good way to turn people off chess, really.
Yeah. And again, it brings me back to this idea of an intelligent tutor. You also don't want to throw, Shakespeare at a second grader. You need to scale the material to guide somebody along. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We did talk a little bit about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to this type of thing, I mean, obviously, in some games are more story rich than others, and some of those stories can be quite intricate. So when you're kind of talking about this approach, how do you keep something from kind of breaking a story that you've established or contradicting things that you already have in game?
Yeah. I'm going to give you an answer, and the answer that I give you today is probably going to be different than an answer I'll give you 6 months from now, because as a field, we're learning all sorts of things. Things are changing every day. There are best practices around these things. A lot of it has to do with alignment, tuning, and the types of data that you're giving at inference time.
Okay.
In particular, though, we want to support developers however they want to use the system, but they don't have to engage in open-ended chat. Most game consoles don't have a keyboard attached. And so what you're doing instead frequently is signaling your intent through some sort of iconography. Like I click on this button and it means a thing, and it means the same thing to me as it does to the internal agent. And that message is passed along. And so there are sort of built-in guardrails against going too far off script, because only the set of actions that are available are available. And if those don't include dialogue, and they don't need to, because we're much more interested in behavior and dynamics of the world, then it's hard to break the game. Similarly, things apply for content moderation and getting into sort of inappropriate content.
Yeah.
Right. I hadn't considered that there's no keyboard or very rarely keyboard input. And so you were getting around the problem of, people are always doing jailbreaking of the current language models and figuring out ways to get them to be offensive. And if you've got them in this sort of choose one of these two options scenario, then, it's not really a possibility. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, granted, we can support developers who want to go into that open-ended chat if they want to and if they decide to, but it's not necessary to engage with the system. There are many things that we'll do without that.
Right. And you're also generating the options. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's a lot of more an approach where it's, a large area that's bounded off. So you do have kind of edges, but more freedom within that confined space.
Yeah. The idea that people can attack these models through natural language is a thing that we can sidestep. And so that gives us a lot of freedom in the things that we can try and explore in sort of a safe way. Speaking of safety, this is why we thought games were a great place to be doing these sorts of things. The types of things that we're doing would equally apply to robotic systems in many cases.
Yeah.
But if you make a mistake with a robot, there can be physical consequences. There can be harm. In a game, it's much safer. It's much simpler. And we thought that was a great place to start. If something goes wrong in a game, it's a bad day. It's a meme. But at the end of the day, nobody dies. Nobody gets hurt.
I've seen people fall off cliffs and they just start over again. So that works well.
Yeah, your little number of guys goes down and then you're back. Yeah. And I mean, it does seem like also good testing ground, because it does seem like the only thing that people who play games like more than playing games is breaking them. So it's like you probably get some surprises thrown your way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things about people who play games is that they are looking for there's all sorts of different people playing games. Some of them are looking to break things. We get a lot of interesting data, can get a lot of interesting data from that. The other thing is that gamers are passionate. They're putting a huge amount of time into these games. They're putting hours in, and all of that data is data we can use, collect, and people are paying for the opportunity to play that game. They're often looking for novel experiences. They're looking for something that is unique and personalized. And so by providing that experience, we can get better data.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a little bit about the generative AI and approach, but how do you see this changing the games industry in the next few years?
I'll take that question more broadly. How does generative AI change things, not just artificial agency? And I mentioned earlier that there are all sorts of techniques that are being deployed right now for animation, textures, models. These sorts of things are coming online just to help game teams scale. The coordination needed across the number of people needed to deliver these assets is enormous, and being able to assist people in delivering these assets has tremendous value. But it's not the place that we're looking at being. I think over the next couple of years, that's going to be a key place for growth in generative AI for games. But I think the longer term, higher value place is when you're integrated more directly into the game engine. They're not just assets you can drop in a folder and then someone does something with them. It's the runtime decision making. It's I need to know deeply how this system works, and I need to integrate deeply with it. That sort of integration and the data that comes from that sort of integration isn't just available on the web. You can't just sort of scrape it. And so I think we're going to see more and more systems moving into this sort of deep integration, whether it's in games or business logic applications or what have you. They're going to get more and more integrated into bespoke systems. In the gaming space, this is going to really provide new opportunities for play, new types of markets. So people who just aren't interested in games because they don't want to play hockey, they don't want to shoot someone, and they're not interested in building something today. They'd much rather have a personal relationship with someone or something.
So we're going to get Alana playing games, is what you're saying?
I mean, I hope so.
Yeah, I was just thinking that it kind of opens up a bunch of different scenarios, and what I really like making things. And so maybe a collaborative art type of game.
That makes a lot of sense. Once you get rid of the technical limitations around the mechanics of games and you can start being more fuzzy about this is what I want, not this is how to do what I want, the options become much more varied, much more immersive, and much more personalized.
Good. So what kind of advice would you give people if they're looking to get into some sort of game-related AI startup?
Good question. Make sure you're passionate about games and AI, not just one or the other. You need to care about both. And games are a lot of fun. They're also a lot of work.
Yeah.
They have a difficult reputation sometimes in industry for being a place where people can burn out. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's the case in our startup, but I do think that there are many game AI startups out there, and some of them are coming from different backgrounds, and some of that culture may come with them. And so you need to be thinking about what is the culture that you're moving into. The other thing to think about is your personal belief on where generative AI is going to have an impact. So for me, I think that's runtime decision-making in the future. Other people think generative art assets. Joining a startup just because it's doing generative AI, if it's not doing the type of thing that you want to be doing, don't do it.
I guess it's just because it is a word that gets used a lot, but I mean, there's a lot of things that would fall under the umbrella of generative AI. You mentioned how important culture is. So, I mean, from your perspective, what type of culture are you aiming with Artificial Agency?
An environment where people have the ability and are empowered to do the things they think are the most important things. So just because there are 4 of us who started this company doesn't mean the 4 of us are just making all of the decisions. We hire people who are better than us in many aspects across many domains, and we rely on them to be able to be experts. When you have people that you can just implicitly trust, the culture sort of shapes itself in a way where trust is valued, but it's also enabling experimentation and play. Much like we want to play with our games, we want to play with how we develop our games. And so all sorts of ideas come out of people when they're working at their best, and they're working at their best when they feel like they have authority and empowerment.
Agency.
There we go. That's word keeps coming up. It's almost like you
not
chose
artificial agency though. Yeah, genuine
agency.
Yeah. And have there been any surprises along the way that have really shocked you, or you just weren't expecting?
I think the biggest things have been how easy it was to get the first prototype going, and then how hard it was to get past the prototype stage. Most of the time when you're working with a piece of software, it's not like you just write it and it just works.
Right.
When you have a system that's trying to cooperate with you, you get a surprising amount of leverage out of that. And so getting to that prototype stage, surprisingly straightforward, surprisingly easy. The harder challenge there is scaling past that prototype stage into a thing that you can actually deploy once you do that, once you get to past that stage, and you can start having a number of people who are having these experiences, and they come and tell you about, hey, I had this experience today. My agent was in the forest. It was looking around, and it noticed that above the forest, there were big block letters that said forest. And it said, oh no, I'm in a simulation. Those sorts of things are just kind of fun.
This is so meta. I don't know. You are yourself a simulation. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, I guess also one of the good things about the time that you started the startup, but there was a ton of machinery in place to, like you said, you're using Minecraft, right? So there was already these, I guess there must be an API for Minecraft.
Yeah, and so there was an API available. Through that, we're able to connect to Minecraft. Many games have a modding community, and so you can sort of drop in and test your stuff out. And then there are commercial partners as well who want to work with us after they get to see some of these demos. So we were able to get kicked off early by taking advantage of some of these APIs and the modding communities.
Yeah, and I hear you have a demo. So what is the demo?
Yeah, we do have a demo. The demo that we are showing is a Minecraft demo. It starts with you're in a town, and there's another character with you, and you're going to go get ready for an adventure. And so there's a bunch of things that need to be done. You might say, can you go grab me some food? And it'll run off and find some food. It may need to collect some. It may find some in a chest. It may need to cook it and bring it back to you. And part of the demo flow is saying, okay, I'm gluten-free. I can't eat the thing that you just brought me. Understanding that, looking through the list of available options in Minecraft and deciding, well, these things are likely to be gluten-free, go craft those, bring them back to the player. Under traditional scripting mechanisms, that would have taken forever, but it just sort of naturally happens. And then let's prepare for an adventure. Can you get us some armor, make anything you need? We're going to just go out into the wilderness. And I'll go out and grab a couple of sets of armor from a chest and maybe make a sword or bring a sword depending on where you're at. Bring it over, throw the stuff on the ground for you, equip their own stuff. You can put it on, ask them, where might we go if we wanted to find a diamond? Or where might we go if we want to find some iron? And start engaging on that. And then, maybe a zombie pops up and say, protect me. And then it does. It just...
Yeah, cool.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It was really interesting to hear what you've been working on. And I know I'm really looking forward to as things progress and seeing what you guys are building over there.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.